The courtroom was packed so tightly that the air itself felt heavy. Danielle sat at the defendant's table, her palms cold and damp, her heart pounding in her chest like a drum. Every eye in the room was on her, and not one of those eyes carried kindness. She could hear the whispers floating through the gallery, soft, cruel voices that stung more than any accusation. Across the room, her boss, Mr. Whitmore, stood tall and confident. His suit was perfect, his voice strong, and his words cut through the air like knives. "She stole from me," he said firmly, pointing at Danielle as though she was already guilty. "She betrayed my trust after everything I did for her." His tone was heavy with disappointment, but his eyes held something sharper, satisfaction. Danielle wanted to scream. She wanted to tell the court that it was all a lie, that she had never touched a cent that wasn't hers. But her throat was tight. When she looked at the judge's face, at the jury members shaking their heads, she knew the weight of his power was against her. Mr. Whitmore was respected, admired. She was just an employee, one who now looked desperate and broken. Her lawyer whispered for her to stay calm, but her mind raced. She remembered the late nights at the office, working twice as hard as anyone else just to prove herself. She remembered how Mr. Whitmore once praised her, told her she had a future. And now here he was, tearing her life apart. Danielle's eyes scanned the crowd and stopped when she saw her mother. Sitting quietly in the back, her mother's face was unreadable, her hands folded neatly in her lap. It had been years since they had spoken, years since her mother had walked out of her life. And yet, here she was, watching in silence, not a word spoken in her defense. Danielle's chest ached with anger and longing all at once. The judge banged the gavel, silencing the whispers. "Order in the court," he said, but the silence felt worse than the noise. Danielle's voice trembled as she finally spoke. "I didn't do this," she said, her words small compared to Mr. Whitmore's booming accusations. "I gave everything to this job." But the room did not believe her. She saw it in their faces, the doubt, the judgment, the quiet decision that she was guilty before the trial had even begun. And in that crushing moment, as her boss's lawyer laid out documents and charts meant to bury her, Danielle's thoughts turned inward. How did I end up here? Fighting for my life, my dignity, and my name, with my own mother watching in silence? Her throat tightened, but she lifted her chin. This was only the beginning. Danielle's story did not begin in the courtroom. It began years earlier, in a small house on the edge of town where she grew up with her father. She was only 5 when her mother left. There had been no explanation, no long goodbye. One morning, Danielle woke up and her mother was simply gone. Her father never spoke much about it. He just worked harder to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. Danielle learned early that life was not soft. She watched her father come home exhausted from long shifts, his hands rough, his back bent, but he always tried to smile for her. He was her whole world. She told herself she didn't need her mother, but deep inside she carried the empty space where a mother's love should have been. At school, Danielle worked harder than everyone else. She believed if she could succeed, if she could prove herself, maybe she would fill that space. While others laughed and played, she stayed behind to study. Teachers admired her drive, but classmates often saw her as too serious, too distant. She had friends, but she rarely let anyone close. When she finished college, she landed a job at Whitmore and Associates, a respected firm that everyone in town looked up to. Mr. Whitmore himself noticed her quickly. He was polished, commanding, and carried himself like someone who always won. At first, he treated Danielle like a rising star. He praised her work, gave her opportunities no one else her age received, and even told her that she reminded him of himself when he was young. Danielle soaked in every word. Finally, someone important believed in her. She threw herself into the job. She stayed late, came in early, answered emails at midnight. Her father worried about how much she pushed herself, but Danielle brushed it off. "This is my chance, Dad," she would say. "I can't waste it." She dreamed of the day she could tell him he didn't have to work anymore, that she would take care of him. But slowly, the praise turned into pressure. Mr. Whitmore stopped asking. He started demanding. What had once felt like mentorship began to feel like control. He would send her errands that had nothing to do with work, take credit for her ideas, and remind her of how much she owed him. Danielle told herself it was the price of success. She convinced herself that if she endured, if she proved her loyalty, she would rise. Yet deep down, she felt the same ache she had felt as a child, the longing to be seen, to be valued, not just used. She thought about her mother more often than she admitted. Why did she leave? Did she ever think about her? That unanswered question followed her like a shadow, whispering that maybe she wasn't worth staying for. By the time Danielle turned 27, she had built a reputation at the firm as the hardest worker. People respected her, but they also envied her. Whispers traveled the halls about how close she was to Mr. Whitmore, how she was surely next in line for promotion. Danielle ignored the talk. She focused only on the goal. Then, one morning, everything seemed to fall into place. Her department head hinted that she was about to be promoted. She had earned it. Years of sacrifice, long nights, and endless work were about to pay off. For the first time, Danielle allowed herself to imagine a brighter future. She pictured her father's proud smile. She pictured buying him a home where he could finally rest. But before that dream could settle, the storm arrived. Small signs appeared first. A coldness in Mr. Whitmore's tone. Missing files she swore she had completed. Rumors that she couldn't trace back. She brushed them aside, too focused on the promotion to see the danger form. Then came the day she was called into his office. He didn't smile. He didn't congratulate her. Instead, he placed a stack of papers on his desk and looked at her as though she were a stranger. "Danielle," he said slowly, "we need to talk about some irregularities in the accounts." Her stomach dropped. In that moment, she realized her life was about to unravel. "Do you want me to push this section closer to 900 words by adding more detailed flashbacks of her childhood and early days at the firm?" The news spread through the office like wildfire. One moment, Danielle was working on a report, and the next, her name was being whispered in every corner. Colleagues she had known for years suddenly avoided her. She could feel the shift in the air, heavy and cold, before she even knew why. It became clear when Mr. Whitmore called a meeting. Everyone was gathered in the conference room, the air thick with tension. Danielle walked in, clutching her notebook, but froze when she saw the projector screen. Her name was highlighted across a slide that read, "Unauthorized transactions." Mr. Whitmore stood at the front, his voice calm but filled with false disappointment. "I trusted Danielle," he said to the room. "She was like family to me, but the evidence is clear. Funds have gone missing, and all signs point to her." Danielle's legs went weak. "That's not true," she said, her voice breaking. But her words sounded small compared to his polished presentation. Charts and numbers filled the screen, fabricated evidence that made her look guilty. The room filled with gasps and whispers. People she had laughed with, worked late nights with, now stared at her as if she were a stranger. She wanted to run, but her feet stayed frozen. "I didn't do this," she tried again, louder this time. "I would never steal." Mr. Whitmore cut her off. "The files don't lie." His tone was sharp, final. "You've disappointed all of us." Security escorted her out of the building that same afternoon. Coworkers who once admired her didn't say a word as she walked past. Some looked at her with pity, others with disgust. She held her head high, but inside she was breaking. By the time she reached home, the news had already spread beyond the office. Articles online carried headlines with her name. Young accountant accused of embezzlement. Neighbors avoided her father at the grocery store. Friends stopped calling. The phone only rang with reporters wanting a statement or creditors demanding payments. Bills began piling up on the kitchen counter. Without her job, Danielle had no income. She had rent, loans, and her father's medical bills to think about. Each envelope felt heavier than the last, like a weight pressing her deeper into the ground. The court summons arrived within days. Mr. Whitmore was pressing charges. He claimed the missing funds totaled thousands. The courtroom that once seemed like a faraway place from television dramas was now her reality. She sat at the defense table, surrounded by strangers who would decide her fate, while her boss, her mentor, stood across the room, painting her as a criminal. He had lawyers. He had polished evidence. He had the respect of the community. And Danielle? She had nothing but the truth and a lawyer who seemed unsure if it would be enough. Each hearing felt like another blow. Documents were presented, witnesses called, all carefully arranged to make her look guilty. Danielle tried to defend herself, but the words never seemed strong enough. The jury's eyes told her everything. They didn't believe her. At night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Her father would sit by her side, telling her they would get through it, but she saw the pain in his eyes. He had worked so hard to protect her, and now he was powerless. One night, after another grueling day in court, Danielle sat at the kitchen table with her head in her hand. She whispered into the silence, "Even if I win, I've already lost." Her reputation was gone. Her friends were gone. Her future, once so bright, now felt like ashes slipping through her fingers. And the trial was only just beginning. Danielle sat in the courtroom day after day, trying to keep her back straight and her voice steady, but inside she was falling apart. Each morning she told herself she would fight, that she wouldn't let Mr. Whitmore destroy her. But when she looked across the room and saw him, calm and collected, whispering with his team of expensive lawyers, she felt like a child trying to stand against a giant. Her lawyer did what he could, but every step felt like a losing battle. Mr. Whitmore had power, influence, and connections. Danielle had truth, but truth seemed too small in a world where lies were dressed up in neat charts and polished words. The community whispered. People who once praised her now shook their heads when her name came up. "Such a shame," they said. "A bright young woman who threw it all away." Danielle heard the whispers at the grocery store, on the bus, even at church. She stopped going out whenever she could, ashamed of the stares that followed her. Her friends pulled away. At first, they sent messages. "Are you okay? We're here for you." But slowly, the text stopped. Calls went unanswered. Invitations disappeared. Danielle understood why. Nobody wanted to be associated with a scandal. Still, the silence hurt more than the cruel words of strangers. Her father tried to stay strong, but Danielle saw how the trial was breaking him too. He sat at every hearing, his hands clasped tightly, his face pale with worry. Sometimes, late at night, she caught him staring at old photos of her as a little girl, back when life was simpler. He would close the album quickly when she walked in, pretending everything was fine. But Danielle knew better. He had always been her protector, and now he couldn't protect her from. The hardest part was the emptiness where her mother should have been. Danielle hadn't spoken to her in years, but in these moments of despair, she found herself aching for a mother's voice, a mother's comfort. She remembered being 7 years old, sitting by the window waiting for her mother to come back, only to realize she never would. That wound had never healed. And now, as she sat accused in court, that wound tore open again. Where was her mother now, when her world was collapsing? The courtroom itself grew more hostile with each session. Mr. Whitmore's lawyers called witnesses who painted Danielle as careless, untrustworthy, even dishonest. A coworker she had once helped study for exams stood on the stand and claimed Danielle often cut corners. A manager testified that she seemed too ambitious, willing to do anything to get ahead. Danielle sat in disbelief, her hands shaking, as people she thought she knew twisted their words into daggers. When her lawyer objected, the judge allowed most of the testimony anyway. Mr. Whitmore's lawyers were skilled at bending the rules, turning every detail against her. They even brought forward a former client who swore she saw Danielle mishandle funds, though Danielle had never worked with her directly. It was lie stacked on lie, and yet each one was delivered so smoothly that it sounded like truth. Danielle's voice shook when she finally took the stand. "I worked hard," she said, her eyes stinging with tears she refused to let fall. "I stayed late. I sacrificed everything for this job. I never stole anything. Not a cent." But the courtroom was quiet. Too quiet. She could feel the doubt hanging in the air, heavy and suffocating. That night, Danielle broke. She sat on the bathroom floor, hugging her knees, trying to silence the storm inside her chest. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered to herself. Her father knocked gently on the door, begging her to open it, but she stayed there in the silence, drowning in the thought that she was alone. In her mind, she heard the voice of her mother. Not real words, but the memory of laughter, the sound of a song hummed while cooking. She wanted that comfort so badly it hurt. She wanted someone to tell her she wasn't broken, that she wasn't worthless. But all she had was the cold tile floor and her father's worried voice outside the door. The trial dragged on, each day heavier than the last. Danielle forced herself to walk back into that courtroom, even when her legs felt like they would give way. She stared at Mr. Whitmore, refusing to look down, even though every piece of evidence made her feel smaller. She told herself she couldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her break, but inside she was already crumbling. And still, her mother never came. The thought repeated in her head like a cruel echo. She knows what's happening. She must have heard. But she won't come. Just like before. The weight of it all pressed down until Danielle felt she might collapse. She wondered if maybe this was how her story ended. Not with victory, not with justice, but with her name ruined and her spirit broken. She whispered to herself one night, "Maybe I was never meant to win." And in the silence that followed, she believed it. Do you want the climax/twist section, 800 to 1,000 words, to explode immediately with her mother walking into the courtroom, or build a few more pages of suspense before her sudden appearance? The courtroom felt heavier that morning than it ever had before. Danielle sat at the defense table, her hands trembling under the wood so no one could see. She had barely slept. Her lawyer whispered to her about today's strategy, but the words floated past her ears without meaning. She was too tired, too broken. She almost didn't care what happened anymore. Mr. Whitmore sat tall on the other side, his tie perfect, his eyes sharp. He looked at her once, only once, and in that look she saw victory. He thought he had already won. The judge called for the next witness. Danielle's heart sank. She expected another false statement, another knife in her back. But then the courtroom doors opened, and time seemed to stop. A woman stepped inside. She was older now, with lines on her face that spoke of years of pain, but Danielle knew her instantly. Her breath caught in her throat. It was her mother. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Danielle's stomach twisted. She gripped the edge of the table, so tightly her knuckles turned white. She didn't know if she wanted to run to her or scream at her. Her mother walked slowly to the witness stand. She did not look at Danielle, not at first. Her eyes were fixed ahead, calm but heavy with something that seemed to weigh her down. She raised her hand, swore to tell the truth, and finally turned her face toward the judge. Danielle's heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear the word. "I left my daughter years ago," her mother began, her voice steady but soft. But it wasn't because I stopped loving her. It was because I was forced. The courtroom stilled. Even the jurors leaned forward, listening. Her mother's hands shook as she continued. When I worked at Whitmore and Associates, Mr. Whitmore found a way to control me. He discovered a mistake I had made, small, but enough to use against me. He threatened to ruin me, to drag my family down. He told me that if I didn't leave quietly, he would destroy me and take Danielle's future with him. I believed him. I was afraid. So I left. Danielle's mouth fell open. The words struck her like a wave, pulling her under. She wanted to believe, wanted to understand, but the anger burned too hot. You left me, she thought. You left me when I needed you. Her mother turned at last, her eyes locking on Danielle. Tears glistened there. I thought disappearing would protect you. I thought if I stayed away, he wouldn't hurt you. But I see now I was wrong. He found you anyway. Mr. Whitmore's face twisted with sudden panic. For the first time, his perfect calm cracked. She's lying, he barked, rising to his feet. This woman has no credibility. She abandoned her own family. The Chief Justice lifted a hand, silencing him. His eyes narrowed as he studied Danielle's mother. Is what you are saying true? Do you have evidence? Her mother reached into her bag and pulled out a thin folder. Her hands shook as she passed it to the clerk. I kept everything, she said softly. Every letter, every threat. I was too scared to use them before, but I can't stay silent any longer. The documents were handed to the judge. He read silently, his face shifting from curiosity to shock. Then he stood, something that rarely happened in courtrooms like that. The sound of his chair scraping against the floor echoed like thunder. This, he said, his voice firm, changes everything. The room erupted in whispers and gasps. Reporters scribbled frantically. The jury exchanged stunned looks. Mr. Whitmore's lawyers muttered among themselves, their polished confidence shaken. Danielle sat frozen, tears spilling down her cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. She couldn't. Her heart was breaking and healing all at once. Her mother's words had opened the deepest wound, but also poured light into it. For years, she had carried the question of why her mother left. Now the truth sat raw before her. Her mother looked at her again, this time without fear. I'm sorry, Danielle, she whispered, though the microphone carried the words through the room. I should have fought harder. I should have stayed. But I am here now, and I will not let him take any more from you. Danielle's chest ached with a storm of emotions, anger, grief, longing, love. She didn't know whether to forgive or to hate. All she knew was that for the first time, the truth was finally out in the open. The silence that followed was heavy but different. It wasn't the silence of judgment. It was the silence of a story breaking apart, a lie unraveling. For the first time, Danielle felt the weight shift, even if just a little, away from her shoulders. And for the first time in weeks, hope flickered inside her. Do you want me to make the resolution section, 600 to 800 words, focus more on Danielle's victory in court or on the painful but emotional reconciliation with her mother? The final days of the trial felt completely different from the beginning. The tension was still there, but the weight had shifted. Every time Mr. Whitmore spoke, his words carried less power. The jury no longer looked at him with respect. They looked at him with suspicion. The evidence Danielle's mother brought forward showed patterns of blackmail and intimidation, and slowly the pieces came together. Danielle sat quietly, her hands clasped, as her lawyer argued with new strength. He pointed to the documents, the threats, the lies. He showed how Mr. Whitmore had manipulated people before, how he had a history of burying anyone who stood in his way. When the verdict finally came, Danielle felt her breath stop. The judge's voice was steady as he read it out. The court finds Danielle Walker not guilty. The words echoed in her ears. For a moment, she didn't believe it was real. Her chest rose and fell as if she had been underwater for weeks and finally surfaced. Her father let out a sob beside her, burying his face in his hand. Reporters rushed forward, cameras flashing, but Danielle sat still, frozen in relief. Mr. Whitmore stood pale and furious, his mask of control completely gone. His lawyers whispered frantically, but it was too late. The judge announced an investigation into his past actions. The man who once looked untouchable was now exposed for what he truly was. Danielle walked out of the courtroom slowly, as if her legs barely remembered how to move. Outside, the air felt sharper, lighter. The crowd buzzed with noise, questions shouted by reporters, strangers murmuring her name. But she only heard one voice, her mother's. She was waiting just beyond the steps, her hands clasped, her face wet with tears. Danielle stopped, staring at her. For years she had imagined this moment, what she would say, what she would feel. Now that it was here, all she felt was exhaustion and a strange, fragile hope. Her mother spoke first. I am so sorry, she whispered. Her voice broke. I left you thinking I was saving you, but I see now I only hurt you more. I can't erase those years. I can only beg for a chance to be in your life again, even if it's just a small piece. Danielle swallowed hard. Her throat ached with words she couldn't release. She thought of birthdays without her mother, Graduations where her father stood alone in the crowd, nights when she cried quietly into her pillow. The anger was real, the scars were deep. But so was the longing. "You should have been there," Danielle said finally, her voice trembling. "I needed you." Her mother nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I know, and I will regret it every day of my life." For a long moment, they just stood there, the noise of the crowd fading into the background. Danielle didn't embrace her. She wasn't ready for that. But she didn't walk away either. It was the smallest step, but it was something. Later that night, sitting at home with her father, Danielle looked around at the quiet kitchen table. The weight of shame and fear was gone, but the scars were still there. Her life had been torn apart, and now she had to rebuild it from the ground up. She thought about the future. She knew it wouldn't be easy to find work again. Her name had been cleared in court, but people would still whisper. Yet for the first time, she didn't feel crushed by it. "I'll start again," she said softly to her father. "But this time on my terms. No more bending, no more letting people use me. I'll build something honest, something that's mine." Her father smiled through tired eyes. "That's my girl." Danielle looked out the window, the night sky wide and endless. She felt the scars inside her, but she also felt strength. She had survived betrayal, humiliation, and abandonment. She had been broken, but she was not destroyed. And deep inside, she knew she would rise again. The courthouse doors opened, and Danielle stepped out into the bright light. The world outside seemed louder than ever, reporters shouting her name, cameras flashing in her face, microphones pushed toward her. The crowd pressed in, eager for a piece of her story. Her father walked close beside her, protective, while her mother stayed a few steps back, unsure but present. Security tried to hold the reporters away, but their voices filled the air. "Danielle, how does it feel to be free? Do you have anything to say to Mr. Whitmore? Will you press charges against him?" The questions came like a storm, but Danielle barely heard them. Her heart was steady now. For weeks she had been drowning in shame and fear, but standing there, she realized something important. She had survived. She paused on the steps, lifting her chin. The flash of cameras nearly blinded her, but she didn't flinch. For the first time in a long time, she felt her strength returning. Not because people believed her now, but because she had faced the fire and walked through it. The crowd grew restless, waiting for her to speak. But Danielle didn't give them a speech. She didn't owe them one. Instead, she let the noise fade in her mind and whispered to herself, almost too soft for anyone else to hear. "They tried to bury me, but I am still here." Her lips curved into the smallest, most fragile smile. It wasn't victory. It wasn't the end of pain, but it was survival. It was proof that she could not be erased. Then she took another step forward, her father's hand brushing against hers, her mother following quietly behind. The reporters still shouted, the cameras still flashed, but Danielle walked down the steps with calm, steady steps. "Hey besties, thanks for staying till the end." Danielle was betrayed, humiliated, and dragged to court, but the truth came out. Her boss fell, her name was cleared, and though scars remain, she walked out stronger. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, comment, and of course subscribe for more stories like this. See you in the next one. Bye!